Welcome back. I've got Sara Ecklein on the line. Sara, how are you?
I'm doing great, Mike. So happy to be here with you this morning.
I am really looking forward to this conversation. We talked a little bit in the pre-show about the importance of the work you do and what we're going to talk about today because it's important for people to get this as right as they can be. There's always changes in life and everything, but I want you to share a little bit about you and the work you do, and then we'll jump into the conversation.
Yeah, so I'm a professional fiduciary. I'm based in the Bay Area, and in California, we do things a little differently. So we have this small license called professional fiduciaries, and I describe that as an umbrella term, but I can act as someone's trustee, as someone's executor, as someone's conservator, and I can also act as an agent for both finance and healthcare. So that's the work that I do. I specialize in trust administration, and one of the things that I absolutely love is working with clients in the planning phase. And so what that looks like is usually working alongside their attorney, and I would be named in successor roles. So working with clients for over a decade and having these conversations proactively while also at the same time administering trust and really, doing this work and knowing and seeing what works well and also when things fail. That's where I love podcasting and meeting people upstream of really, really conveying the importance of not only getting your estate plan, but after that, there's so many other pieces to kind of comprehensively plan and get the whole family involved and on board with what that plan is.
Yeah, you usually hear the horror stories after somebody passes away, the mess of the estate and who gets what and how come it's this or how come it's that. And even recently, I didn't dig into the headlines, but apparently there's some issues with the estate of Jimmy Buffett, the musician that passed away last year, and there's some issues with it with family members. And surprise, surprise, not shocked by that. It happens, unfortunately. It reminds me though, my late Aunt Shelley did this, and it was, and once we saw it, all of us, that created wills and whatnot, had this clause in the will because there was some dynamics there, and I'm not going to go into it because I have no idea if family listens to this show other than my daughter, and no sense in spilling beans or saying anything, but
Yeah.
there was a clause in there that my aunt put in there that said, if anybody disputes anything that's laid out in this will, you will get nothing. I'm paraphrasing it, but
Yeah.
that's
A no
basically
contest clause, it's called.
exactly. And
Yeah.
that was the hold some people accountable because unfortunately, as I'm sure you've seen and we all have seen, when someone passes, and not to sound morbid or grim, the body hasn't cooled yet, and everybody's digging in trying to get their share of whatever, and it's disheartening to see.
It
So,
is.
I tell my kids I'm not leaving you anything because I'm not going to have anything to give. So, but I say that tongue in cheek. But I'm gonna do it the Warren Buffett way. I'm giving it all away. There'll be nothing left. That's right. Buffett's kids are going to be taken care of. They're not hurting. But ultimately, it's it's so important. I know family members that have had trust, created instead of a will per se. I mean, there's still instructions and living will and all that kind of good stuff, but it's a way to quite frankly help manage things a little bit better. And there's again, as there's so many different avenues and ways to do it, not only from a federal taxation level, but each state is different too. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, but a thought that came to mind is, let's say you have a family, a husband and wife, they're in their late 50s, they live in Michigan, for example.
Mhm.
Okay. And then they retire and like, we're going to do the retiree thing and we're going south and we're going down to Florida or we're going to Arizona or we're going to California, and they don't change anything. They don't live in Michigan anymore. So it's like when they go, it's like, okay, well, this is what it was based on this, but you're here, and there's all these little nuances. And as you alluded to before, when life happens, it's a living document. So when things change, you buy a different house or you have different assets or anything like that. it's good for you to, update your estate plan and everything else. So, love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, it's exactly that. These are living documents. What I find, and you brought up so many important points. I think the first off is yes, I think we all know those families, right? That we've heard the worst case scenarios, and that's I think for those of us that are tending to this area of our life where let's also just share the statistics that only 1 in 3 people are actually putting together their estate plan in the United States. That's one of my missions is to close that gap because really we all need an estate plan. And it's really the one guarantee in life, right? We're all going to die. So the more that we have these conversations, I mean, this is very much of what connected me to launching a podcast last year. It's called The Legacy of Love. And what I think is the more that I have these conversations, the reality is that we live in a death denying culture. And so facing our mortality, I think is really kind of a foundation and a requirement for setting up our estate plan, at least doing it well, right? There's documents like our advanced healthcare directive, like who will be making the decisions in the event we're unable to. What does a good death look like? And these are personal decisions that's going to be unique. Of course, there's themes, but this is where and I think why so many people avoid it is we're not leaning into that. So that's where I actually was really looking forward to being on this podcast, just knowing that you're talking to leaders, whether you have, children, whether you're a parent, I consider myself like a matriarch of my family. And the more that I think as leaders we connect to the power that this work can do, the more that that can have a ripple, not just for our life, but for future generations, and really leaving that lasting legacy of love. So I think that the starting point too is most people, and again, these are the ones that are planning, are approaching this with a place of, worry, concern, anxiety, not really knowing, not feeling informed. And I think that that's where we need to kind of evolve. We need to really bring these conversations more to light, and also just acknowledge that the estate plan touches, yes, our mortality. It also talks about our money and our assets, another big taboo topic. And it also touches upon our relationships. And when conversations, what I find, these conversations are really had behind closed doors with our attorney, which, yes, that's true. And of course, those are going to be private and confidential, but let's also normalize the playing field. At the end of the day, I think all families, there's some level of dysfunction. And these conversations are going to be uncomfortable, but let's acknowledge it and also lean into that reality. Because if we avoid it, then what does that look like? We either choose to never plan, or we do plan, but we meet with our attorney maybe just one time and we shove the documents in the drawer. We don't communicate with our loved ones what that plan is. And so then, even though you might have checked this off the box of things to do, most likely that plan is not going to go well. And so it's like, of course, no wonder families are fighting, after death. If no one was really brought in on the conversations proactively. So the successful families I find are leaning in and having conversations about death, about money, about the family relationships and dynamics. And it's something that we're constantly kind of tending to because our life, like you mentioned, is going to evolve and change. Tax codes will change, laws will change. So this is where we really need to kind of, I think, evolve and do better for ourselves, for our families, and especially as leaders.
I'm glad you mentioned the leadership thing, and there's a second thing I want to say in a second, but yeah, I didn't have this planned when the chat was scheduled and all this stuff, but this is an idea for all leaders that are running businesses. Number one, if you don't have your estate plan set up as a leader of your family and of your business, please do so. Reach out to somebody, reach out to Sarah, reach out to anybody to get that done. Secondly, as an employee benefit, offer this. Work with a firm or organization that can do wills or trusts or things like that and make that part of your employee benefit plan. That way, every one of your employees will have an estate plan or a will or something lined up. They could be 20 years old. Don't care. It's a living document. They'll adjust it all the time. Give your employees that gift. Their families will thank you for decades later, if not centuries later, because as an organization you did that. So that's just something that came top of mind. You and I didn't discuss it. I just thought that would, because I think about employee benefits and employee retention, workplace culture, and the work that I do. That is an amazing benefit. That's a whole lot better than, okay, we have a ping pong table or we give you the fancy coffee. Spend a few $1,000, get these people some trust set up for their families and themselves. That'll be one less thing they have to deal with later in life. So that's a
A
top of
huge
mind
gift,
thing.
and I think that that's such an important piece there. I mean, I'm hearing also even just in my network, of people that are really like-minded, where there's an attorney, and that's one of her questions is when she's networking and trying to build her team and her referral network. She's asking, what is your estate plan? Like, do you have these documents in place for yourself, for your business? If the answer is no, that is not a referral partner. And I love her for just going out there and saying that, because this is where I think it does come down to identity, of really living in integrity, of being, walking the talk. And I'll share a story with you. Just last year, I took over a handful of cases from another professional fiduciary on her deathbed. And I made a lot of assumptions going into it. Was this, very sudden? Things must have been really sudden, and she got sick overnight. Unfortunately, I found out later, no, that wasn't the case. She was sick for many years. Things were not being tended to for her own life, and also and not being really responsive to her clients. And then the other piece that I kind of assumed is, why was she kind of holding on to these cases? Was it related to, like, making money? And I found out she didn't pay herself for 8 years. So what it came down to, at least this is my conclusion. I'll never know for sure, but I think it really did come down to the identity and the belief that only I can do this job. And then I literally had two 30-minute phone calls with her before she passed away. That is it. Her family has had to mail me the files, the physical files for these cases. And for some, she was working for the families for, for like 15 years. So there's just a lot of history that, only so much will show up in the actual physical files, where it would have been much better if, we were doing this years before and it didn't require a crisis. So I think that for me is what's, only added more fuel to kind of my mission, my passion for having these conversations. Because as leaders, whether, we're running a company, whether we're doing this work, we assume that people have, their stuff together. I don't know if I can swear or not, so I'll just say stuff. And for me, it was really this kind of moment of realizing, like, oh, the emperor has no clothes. So, let's also kind of, I think, bring ourselves down from, the pedestal of being the leader, and being humble enough of maybe, oh, I don't know what to do here. This feels too overwhelming. And who do I need to partner with to begin um, to plan that kind of succession, whatever that looks like, wherever you're at in your journey. I'm only in my mid 30s, so my succession plan is going to look really different than someone that's nearing their retirement. But this is still kind of, again, that extra layer of planning that's required when we're leaders.
Yeah, it's critically important. And it's so funny because so many leaders, they do a great job at planning and preparing for everything through work. And even in their personal lives to a certain degree, they've got everything structured, lined up, and everything's kind of mapped out. But as you said earlier on, when it comes to end of life planning, it's one of those things where people go, "No, I'm good. I'm fine." And we both know people that were in like the case you just gave. As far as we knew, they were alive, doing well, don't have to worry about it. And all of a sudden, it's like they're literally calling you from, the last moments of their life to hand off things. And that's it's one thing if it was, a colleague. Imagine it's a loved one,
Mhm.
and you're like, okay,
Yeah.
what about this? Who's gonna watch the dog? Who's gonna do this? What about this? What about this, thing you're doing for this company that, you're doing? It's not like you're an employee, you're actually a consultant for them. What's that look like? So uh, again, be prepared is so critically important in every aspect of your life, if at all possible. But we have to avoid the being afraid of the end of life. And I think a lot of it is people like, well, fear I won't get everything done. Well, get done what you can, and realize that we probably won't get to do everything we want to do, and that's okay. If there's something that's hot button pressing that I absolutely have to do this before I pass away, then get that scheduled and go book it and do it. Whatever it is, get it done. It's so critically important. But before I want to share a funny story. It was regarding my parents' will, and they had drafted it up when my brother and I were quite young. And they said if something were to happen to both of them, where they were both gone, then we were to live with our Uncle Joe, which was my mom's oldest brother. And he had kids of his own, so we got along well and all of that kind of stuff. Uncle Joe was a crazy, crazy dude. And I'm not saying that, mental health crazy kind of thing. He was out there. Some of the things he did in life was a little out there to say the least, and I'll leave it at that. But and he made some questionable decisions in life, nothing illegal that I'm aware of, but just, like, if you're a person of faith, you'd go, I'm not sure this is going to look good. So long story short, my uncle passed away in 2002, and, my parents were still alive. And, my brother and I, asked them, I said, so, have you updated the will lately? No. I was like, well, you guys are getting up there. So if you both pass away, do we have to go live with Uncle Joe? Because quite frankly, we're not sure we want to go where he might be. And, everybody laughed about it and all of that kind of stuff. But I say that tongue in cheek. But again, going back to what we talked about, people will, like you said, they file it in a drawer and go away and they don't think about it and something's completely changed, where it's like, okay, yeah, you have to live with this person. Well, what happens if the relationship between you and that person went south? And they would say there's no way that we'd want to do that. Well, then,
Oh,
yeah,
that's
it,
such a great point. I mean, and that's a really big piece is the people that we're naming in these roles. Are they really the best person to do the job? And just bringing awareness that there are professionals like me. Where in whatever state you're in, there are professionals that do this work, and sometimes that's the one of another great piece that and a gift for families, like especially with challenging family dynamics, blended families. Sometimes just having a neutral party there and a professional can just make things go so much smoother. And then, allowing, the kids to be kids and not be burdened with the responsibility of administering the trust or estate. So, yeah, absolutely. That's a piece. But yes, I see those plans a lot where people will name like their healthcare decision maker who's 10 years older than them and lives on an opposite coast. And you're like, that's probably not going to be the best person to name. You can include them in your end of life, absolutely. But, when when there's a medical crisis, is this person going to really drop everything and be there for you? I don't know.
Yeah, there's a distinct possibility they won't. And if you haven't seen them in 10 or 15 years because you moved out of state, they, having worked with doctors over my career, nothing personal, but they see thousands of patients every year. They may not
Mm.
remember you unless they happen to pull up the chart, and they may remember some of the aspects, but unless they have your photo, they might not be able to pick you out in a lineup. So yeah, you have to make sure things are tidied up. So I love this conversation, Sarah, and it's really important. And again, going back to what I mentioned a moment ago, leaders, go make sure your estate plans are all set up. What doesn't matter what state you're in, get things set up. If you have the dynamics of an interesting family, then definitely consider working with Sarah if you're in California or other people across the country that can be that neutral party that can distribute as you want things to be distributed without all the added drama that tends to happen when people pass. So where can people find out more about you, Sarah, and all this amazing work you're doing?
Yeah, so my website is trustandhonor.co. I also have a free workbook. If this conversation resonated with you, I absolutely invite you to go download it. You can get a link to that on the show notes, and you can access it on my website. But really, it's an exercise for people wherever you're at in your estate planning journey to really get intentional and connected with what are your values, what are your wishes, whether you're going back to your estate plan or you need to plan and you haven't gotten to it yet. I think all of the exercises would be really helpful for listeners. I'm also really active on LinkedIn. So if people want to connect with me, I'd love to hear from you and what resonated with you about this conversation. So thank you so much, Mike, for having me. This has been such a pleasure.
Oh, thank you, Sarah, for the work you're doing. It's critically important. And as our population continues to age, it's one of those
Yeah.
things that happens. There's more and more people that desperately need to get to this sooner than later. So thanks again for being on the show.
Thank you, Mike.